The narrative around attachment theory has become so pervasive that many people have begun misidentifying themselves as avoidant when they're actually experiencing normal, healthy responses to unhealthy relationship dynamics. You set a boundary and you're told you're avoidant. You need some time alone to recharge and you're labeled fearful of intimacy. You end a relationship that wasn't meeting your needs, and suddenly you're commitment phobic. This misidentification is damaging because it convinces secure or anxiously attached people that they're the problem when they're actually responding appropriately to partners who can't show up, to relationships that demand too much sacrifice of self, or to dynamics that are genuinely dysfunctional. The internet's obsession with attachment styles has created culture where every protective response, every boundary, every moment of needing space gets pathologized as avoidance. But there's crucial difference between being avoidant and being appropriately self-protective, between having commitment issues and refusing to commit to someone who is wrong for you, between fear of intimacy and recognition that someone specific isn't capable of genuine intimacy. Understanding the difference requires looking at specific markers that distinguish avoidant attachment from healthy autonomy, defensive withdrawal from appropriate boundary setting, fear of vulnerability from wisdom about when vulnerability is safe. If you're constantly being told you're avoidant, but these accusations don't resonate with your actual internal experience or your behavior in healthy relationships, you need to examine whether you're truly avoidant or whether you're simply responding sanely to insane situations, protecting yourself appropriately from people who can't meet your needs, or maintaining the sense of self that genuine partnership requires, rather than abandoning yourself to accommodate someone else's dysfunction. 1. You can tolerate emotional discomfort without fleeing. The hallmark of avoidant attachment is the inability to remain present during emotional discomfort. When conversations become emotionally intense, when conflicts arise, when vulnerability is required, the avoidant person's automatic response is to flee, either physically or emotionally. They shut down, they change the subject, they find reasons to leave, they go silent, they create distance. This flight response is not conscious choice, but automatic defense against the overwhelming anxiety that emotional intensity creates in their nervous system. If you're genuinely avoidant, emotional discomfort feels intolerable, and your system drives you toward escape as if you're in actual danger. But if you're not avoidant, you can sit with emotional discomfort without needing immediate escape. You might not enjoy difficult conversations or conflicts. Nobody does. But you can stay present during them. You can tolerate the anxiety that vulnerability creates without immediately protecting yourself through withdrawal. You can listen to your partner express hurt or disappointment without shutting down or leaving. You might need to take breaks during particularly intense conversations to regulate yourself, but you come back to finish the discussion rather than avoiding it indefinitely. This capacity to remain present during discomfort is fundamental difference between avoidant attachment and healthy functioning. The key distinction is between strategic retreat and automatic flight. If you occasionally need space during conflicts to calm down and gather your thoughts, that's healthy self-regulation, not avoidance. If you come back after that space and re-engage with the difficult conversation, you're demonstrating capacity that avoidant people lack. But if you routinely flee emotional intensity and never return to resolve issues, if difficult conversations consistently end with you leaving or shutting down, if your partner can predict that any emotional discussion will result in your withdrawal, that pattern suggests avoidant attachment rather than healthy boundary setting. Your internal experience during emotional discomfort also reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you might feel uncomfortable during difficult conversations, but you don't feel existentially threatened. You don't experience your partner's emotions as danger requiring immediate escape. You don't feel like you're being attacked or trapped. You recognize the discomfort as temporary state that's part of maintaining healthy relationship. But if you are avoidant, emotional discomfort registers in your nervous system as actual threat, triggering fight or flight response that makes staying present feel impossible. Another revealing factor is how you handle your own emotions, not just your partner's. If you're not avoidant, you can sit with your own difficult feelings without immediately needing to distract from them or shut them down. When you're sad, anxious, or upset, you can allow yourself to feel those emotions and process them rather than immediately moving to suppress or avoid them. You might seek support from others when you're struggling rather than always handling everything alone. But if you're avoidant, your own emotions feel threatening, and you've developed elaborate strategies to avoid feeling them deeply, staying busy, intellectualizing, minimizing, or disconnecting from your emotional experience entirely. The capacity to tolerate emotional discomfort also shows in how you respond to your partner's needs for emotional connection and support. If you're not avoidant, when your partner is upset and needs comfort, you can provide that comfort without it feeling like burden or threat. You might not always know the perfect thing to say or do, but you don't flee from their emotional need. You can sit with them in their difficulty without needing to immediately fix it or make them stop feeling what they're feeling. But if you're avoidant, your partner's emotional needs trigger your discomfort so intensely that you withdraw, minimize their feelings, or try to make them handle their emotions alone, because being present for their emotional experience feels overwhelming to your system. 2. You actually want to repair. After conflicts. Avoidant people struggle profoundly with relationship repair after conflicts. Their pattern is to create distance after disagreements and to wait for issues to blow over through time rather than through active repair. They avoid the vulnerability that repair requires, the acknowledgement of their role in conflict, the expression of care about the other person's feelings, the genuine engagement with resolving what went wrong. For the avoidant person, repair feels more threatening than the original conflict because it requires precisely the emotional openness and vulnerability they're organized around avoiding. They'd rather let things remain unresolved and tense than go through the discomfort of repair process. If you're not avoidant, you actually want to repair after conflicts. You don't feel comfortable with ongoing tension or unresolved issues. You're motivated to reconnect with your partner after disagreements because the disconnection feels bad and you want to restore the closeness. This doesn't mean you immediately cave or take all the blame, but you genuinely want to work through what happened and get back to good place in the relationship. The disconnection that conflicts create is uncomfortable enough that you're willing to do the vulnerable work of repair to resolve it. Your motivation for repair also comes from genuine caring about your partner's feelings and the relationship's health. If you're not avoidant, when you've hurt your partner, even unintentionally, you feel bad about that hurt and want to address it. You can take accountability for your impact without becoming overly defensive. You can apologize genuinely without treating the apology as humiliating defeat. You can engage with your partner's perspective on what went wrong without needing to be entirely right or to prove they're entirely wrong. This capacity for mutual accountability and genuine repair is something avoidant people struggle with intensely. If you're not avoidant, you also initiate repair rather than always waiting for your partner to do the emotional labor of reconnecting. You reach out after conflicts to check in or to continue the conversation. You express that you don't like the distance that conflict created and you want to resolve things. You demonstrate through your behavior that maintaining connection is important enough to you that you'll work through difficulties rather than just letting them accumulate or create permanent rifts. This initiating of repair is relatively natural for secure people, but feels almost impossible for avoidant people who experience reaching out after conflict as deeply vulnerable and threatening. The timeline of your repair process also matters. If you're not avoidant, you generally want to repair relatively soon after conflicts. You might need some time to calm down and collect your thoughts, but you're not comfortable with days or weeks of unresolved tension. You understand that letting issues fester makes them harder to address and creates accumulating damage to the relationship. But if you're avoidant, you're comfortable with extensive time passing after conflicts without repair, preferring to just move forward as if nothing happened, rather than doing the work of actually resolving what created the conflict. Your comfort with repair conversations themselves is also telling. If you're not avoidant, while repair conversations might be somewhat uncomfortable, they're not unbearable. You can engage in meta conversation about the relationship and what's working or not working. You can discuss patterns you're noticing and ways to handle conflicts better going forward. You can handle feedback about your behavior without it feeling like character assassination. But if you're avoidant, repair conversations feel excruciating. The vulnerability of discussing the relationship directly, of acknowledging problems, of accepting feedback. All of this activates such intense discomfort that you avoid these conversations entirely or participate minimally, agreeing to things in the moment just to end the discomfort, but with no genuine intention to address what's being discussed. 3. You don't experience your partner's needs as threats. One of the most defining characteristics of avoidant attachment is experiencing a partner's normal relationship needs as threatening pressure or attempts to control. The avoidant person hears reasonable requests for more consistency, more emotional sharing, more quality time together, and their system registers these needs as attacks on their autonomy, as evidence that the partner is too needy or demanding, as pressure they must resist to maintain their sense of self. This experience is so automatic that avoidant people genuinely believe their partners are asking for too much when they're actually asking for basic components of healthy relationship. If you're not avoidant, your partner's needs don't register as threats. When your partner expresses wanting more quality time together, or more emotional intimacy, or more consistency in communication, you hear these as information about what would make them feel loved and secure in the relationship. You might not be able to meet every need perfectly, but you don't experience the needs themselves as attacks or attempts to control you. You understand that people in relationships have needs, and that expressing those needs is healthy communication rather than manipulation or pressure. Your response to your partner's needs reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, when your partner expresses a need, you consider whether and how you can meet that need. You might negotiate about what's realistic or sustainable. You might explain your own needs and look for compromises, but you approach the conversation as problem-solving between partners rather than as defense against threat. You recognize that meeting each other's needs is part of partnership, and that being asked to consider someone else's needs isn't loss of autonomy, but rather normal aspect of being in relationship. If you're avoidant, however, your partner's needs trigger immediate defensive response. You feel compressed, trapped, pressured. You experience the need as demand that you must resist to maintain your freedom. You find yourself getting angry or resentful about perfectly reasonable requests. You frame your partner as needy or demanding, rather than recognizing that what they're asking for is normal and healthy. This defensive interpretation of needs is automatic and hard to see from inside the experience, but it creates dynamic where your partner learns they can't express needs without triggering your withdrawal or defensiveness. The specific needs that trigger avoidant people are revealing: needs for emotional intimacy, for consistent communication, for quality time together, for vulnerability and sharing, for reassurance and affection. All of these normal relationship needs feel threatening to avoidant people. If you're not avoidant, these needs make sense to you. You might not always meet them perfectly, but you understand why they matter, and you don't resent being asked to consider them. But if you're avoidant, these needs feel excessive and controlling, evidence that the person wants too much or is trying to trap you in a relationship that limits your freedom. Your own needs and how you express them also reveal whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you have needs for both connection and autonomy, and you can express both sets of needs directly. You can tell your partner when you need more closeness and when you need some space. You can be direct about what you need from the relationship. But if you're avoidant, you struggle to identify and express needs for connection. You can express needs for space and independence easily, but acknowledging that you need emotional intimacy or support from your partner feels too vulnerable. You might have these needs, but you hide them, preferring to go without rather than risk the vulnerability of expressing need and having it potentially not met. 4. You can ask for help without feeling weak. Avoidant people have deep-seated resistance to asking for help. This resistance stems from their core wound around vulnerability and dependence. They learned early that expressing needs or depending on others was dangerous, that people couldn't be counted on, that self-sufficiency was the only safe path. As adults, this translates into fierce independence that looks healthy on the surface, but is actually rigid defense against the vulnerability of needing someone. Avoidant people will struggle alone with problems that could be easily solved with support, rather than risk asking for help. If you're not avoidant, you can ask for help when you need it without experiencing that request as fundamental threat to your identity or worth. You recognize that everyone needs help sometimes, that asking for support is human rather than weak, that interdependence is healthy rather than threatening. You might have some discomfort asking for help. Most people do. But the discomfort isn't so intense that it prevents you from asking when you genuinely need support. You can receive help without feeling diminished or indebted. The types of help you can ask for reveal whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you can ask for practical help, like assistance with tasks or projects, and you can also ask for emotional support when you're struggling. You can tell your partner when you're having a hard time and need comfort. You can express when you're feeling insecure and need reassurance. You can admit when you don't know how to handle something and ask for perspective or advice. These requests for emotional support are particularly difficult for avoidant people because they require admitting emotional need, which feels more vulnerable than asking for practical help. If you're avoidant, asking for help feels like admission of inadequacy or failure. You pride yourself on handling things independently, and you experience needing help as evidence that you're not as capable as you believe you should be. You might accept help if it's offered without you asking, but you rarely initiate requests for support. You suffer through difficulties alone rather than reaching out, and if someone asks if you need help, you typically insist you're fine even when you're clearly struggling. Your response when help is offered also matters. If you're not avoidant, you can gracefully accept help that's offered. You express gratitude and you allow yourself to receive support without immediately needing to reciprocate or to prove you didn't really need it. But if you're avoidant, even when help is offered, you often refuse it or minimize your need for it. You might accept help reluctantly, but then do everything you can to demonstrate you could have handled it yourself. You keep score of who helped whom, and you need to maintain balance where you're not receiving more than you're giving, because receiving creates an uncomfortable sense of obligation or debt. How you respond when your partner needs help also reveals your attachment patterns. If you're not avoidant, you generally want to help your partner when they're struggling. You feel good about being able to support them. You don't keep score or resent their needs for help. But if you're avoidant, your partner's needs for help can trigger resentment or resistance. You might help but grudgingly, or you might subtly communicate that they should be handling things themselves. Their need for help from you feels like burden rather than opportunity to strengthen the relationship through mutual support. 5. You don't keep score of independence versus togetherness. Avoidant people maintain rigid internal accounting of how much independence versus togetherness exists in their relationships. They monitor carefully to ensure they're not spending too much time together, not becoming too intertwined, not losing too much of their separate identity. This vigilant scorekeeping creates anxiety when the balance tips toward more togetherness, triggering withdrawal to restore what they perceive as necessary independence. The scorekeeping is exhausting and prevents natural flow of intimacy that characterizes healthy relationships. If you're not avoidant, you don't keep careful track of how much time you're spending together versus apart. You respond to what feels right in the moment rather than maintaining rigid ratios. Sometimes you want more togetherness, and sometimes you need more space, and this varies based on what's happening in your life and how you're feeling, rather than based on need to maintain specific balance that protects your independence. You can spend several days in a row with your partner without feeling suffocated or trapped, and you can also enjoy time apart without it meaning anything about the relationship's health. The flexibility in how you approach togetherness and independence is key difference. If you're not avoidant, you can adjust based on circumstances and needs without anxiety. If work is stressful and you need more time to yourself, you can take that without it being crisis or requiring extended withdrawal. If you're going through difficulty and want more presence from your partner, you can ask for and receive that without it permanently changing the relationship's balance. But if you're avoidant, you need strict maintenance of independence that doesn't flex much based on circumstances. Any movement toward more togetherness triggers anxiety about losing yourself and requires corrective withdrawal to restore the balance you need to feel safe. Your comfort with different forms of interdependence reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you can gradually build life together with shared activities, mutual friends, intertwined schedules, without experiencing this integration as loss of self. You can make decisions jointly and consider your partner's needs and preferences in your choices without feeling controlled. You can have routines together without feeling trapped by them. But if you're avoidant, each step toward greater integration triggers resistance. You need to maintain separate friend groups, separate hobbies, separate living spaces longer than is typical. You resist joint decision-making and routines because they feel like loss of autonomy. The language you use about relationships also reveals your patterns. If you're not avoidant, you naturally use we and us language when discussing your life and plans. You think of yourselves as unit while also maintaining your individual identities. But if you're avoidant, you predominantly use I and individual language, even in contexts where couple language would be natural. You conceptualize your life as primarily individual, with the relationship as add-on, rather than as genuinely shared life. This linguistic pattern reveals the compartmentalization you maintain that prevents deeper integration. How you feel after spending time together is also revealing. If you're not avoidant, spending quality time with your partner generally leaves you feeling good, connected, energized by the intimacy. You might need some alone time afterward to recharge if you're introverted, but you don't feel drained or suffocated by time together. But if you're avoidant, time together, especially intimate time together, leaves you feeling compressed and desperate for space. The intimacy created through connection triggers your defenses rather than nourishing you, making you need extensive alone time to recover and re-establish your sense of independent self. 6. You can express your feelings without overthinking. Avoidant people struggle profoundly with emotional expression. They've learned to suppress, intellectualize, or disconnect from their emotions rather than feeling and expressing them. When asked how they feel, avoidant people often can't answer because they're not connected enough to their emotional experience to identify and name their feelings. When they do identify emotions, expressing them to others, especially to romantic partners, feels extremely vulnerable and threatening. They overthink every emotional expression, analyzing whether it's safe to reveal these feelings, what consequences might follow, whether expressing emotion makes them weak or exposed. If you're not avoidant, expressing your feelings is relatively natural and doesn't require extensive internal debate. When something makes you happy, sad, angry, or hurt, you can identify those feelings and express them without it feeling like major vulnerability. You might consider the best way to express certain feelings, especially difficult ones, but you don't torture yourself over whether to express them at all. You understand that emotional expression is normal part of intimate relationships and that sharing your feelings creates closeness rather than threatens it. The range of emotions you can express matters. If you're not avoidant, you can express the full spectrum of human emotions, including the vulnerable ones like sadness, fear, insecurity, need. You can tell your partner when you're feeling down or when something is worrying you. You can express when you miss them or when you need reassurance. These vulnerable emotional expressions don't feel like they're going to destroy you. But if you're avoidant, you can express anger or irritation relatively easily because those emotions create distance, but you struggle intensely with vulnerable emotions that would create intimacy. Expressing sadness, fear, insecurity, or need feels unbearable because it requires admitting vulnerability and dependence. The spontaneity of your emotional expression also reveals your patterns. If you're not avoidant, you express emotions relatively close to when you experience them. If something bothers you, you bring it up fairly soon, rather than letting it fester. If you're excited about something, you share that excitement. If you're upset, you express that upset. This temporal closeness between feeling and expression means you're not heavily filtering or suppressing your emotional experience. But if you're avoidant, there's significant delay between feeling and expression if expression happens at all. You need time to intellectualize the feeling, to decide if it's safe to express, to craft exactly how to express it in ways that minimize vulnerability. Often, by the time you express something, you've disconnected from the feeling enough that the expression is flat or intellectual rather than emotionally alive. How you respond to your partner's emotional expressions also matters. If you're not avoidant, when your partner expresses their feelings, you can receive those expressions without becoming defensive or trying to shut them down. You can listen to their emotions, validate their experience, and engage with their feelings rather than intellectualizing them or dismissing them. But if you're avoidant, your partner's emotional expressions, especially vulnerable ones, trigger your discomfort. You might change the subject, minimize their feelings, offer solutions to make the feelings stop, or simply withdraw from the intensity of their emotional experience. 7. You don't romanticize being alone. Avoidant people have constructed elaborate narrative about the superiority of solitude and independence. They romanticize being alone, framing it as higher state of existence than being in relationship. They talk about how they don't need anyone, how they're happiest on their own, how relationships are constraining, and solitude is freedom. This romanticization serves defensive function, protecting them from having to acknowledge that they actually do have needs for connection and that their aloneness is often more lonely than liberating. The narrative allows them to frame their isolation as choice rather than recognizing it as defense against the vulnerability of intimacy. If you're not avoidant, you enjoy time alone, but you don't romanticize it as superior to connection. You recognize that both solitude and intimacy have value, that you need both in your life, that neither is inherently better than the other. You appreciate the recharge and independence that alone time provides, but you also value the connection and intimacy that relationship provides. You don't feel superior or more evolved for being able to be alone. You just recognize that, as one aspect of balanced life, that also includes meaningful connections with others. The balance between enjoying solitude and wanting connection reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you want both. You value your independence and alone time, and you also genuinely want intimate partnership. These desires coexist without one canceling out the other. But if you're avoidant, you emphasize your preference for solitude and independence as if wanting relationship is weakness or neediness. You frame people who need connection as somehow less mature or capable than you are. You pride yourself on being fine alone in ways that suggest you're not actually fine, but rather defended against acknowledging your needs for connection. How you feel during extended periods alone also matters. If you're not avoidant, while you might enjoy some alone time, extended periods without meaningful connection start to feel isolating rather than peaceful. You miss having someone to share your life with. You want companionship and intimacy. But if you're avoidant, extended solitude feels comfortable and right. You don't experience loneliness in the way most people do because you've suppressed or disconnected from your attachment needs. The absence of relationship feels like relief rather than loss because it means you don't have to manage the vulnerability that connection requires. Your attitude about people who want relationships also reveals your patterns. If you're not avoidant, you understand that wanting partnership is normal and healthy. You don't judge people for wanting connection or see them as weak for having relationship needs. But if you're avoidant, you have subtle or not so subtle contempt for people's relationship needs. You frame people in relationships as codependent or as having lost themselves. You're proud of not being like those people who need someone else. This superiority about your independence reveals the defensive function it serves, rather than it being secure comfort with both connection and autonomy. 8. You can receive love without suspicion. Avoidant people struggle to receive love and affection without suspicion or discomfort. When partners express care, affection, or commitment, avoidant people's defenses activate. They wonder what the person wants. They suspect manipulation. They feel uncomfortable with the vulnerability that receiving love creates. They might dismiss expressions of love as exaggerated or insincere. They might deflect with humor. They might simply not respond or acknowledge the expression at all. This difficulty receiving love ensures that avoidant people remain defended even when they're with partners who genuinely care about them. If you're not avoidant, you can receive expressions of love and affection with relative comfort. When your partner tells you they love you, or appreciate you, or are happy with you, you can hear those expressions at face value. You don't immediately wonder what they want or suspect hidden agendas. You don't feel uncomfortable with the intimacy those expressions create. You can simply receive the love and appreciate it. This doesn't mean you never have moments of insecurity or doubt, but generally, you can accept that when someone expresses caring for you, they mean it. Your response to affection and physical intimacy also reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you generally enjoy physical affection and closeness. You can cuddle, hold hands, be physically close without it feeling suffocating. You might initiate physical affection, and you respond warmly when your partner initiates it. But if you're avoidant, physical affection beyond sexual contact often feels uncomfortable or unnecessary. You pull away from extended embraces. You create physical space. You might tolerate affection briefly, but you need distance afterward to re-establish your boundaries. The closeness that affection creates triggers your discomfort with intimacy. How you respond when your partner does something thoughtful for you is also telling. If you're not avoidant, you can appreciate gestures of care without suspicion or discomfort. Your partner brings you your favorite food when you're stressed, and you feel touched and grateful. But if you're avoidant, thoughtful gestures might make you uncomfortable. You might minimize the gesture or insist it wasn't necessary. You might feel obligated rather than touched. You might become more distant afterward because the intimacy created by someone caring for you triggers your defenses. Your capacity to believe you're loved matters too. If you're not avoidant, when you're in relationship with someone who consistently shows up, expresses care, and demonstrates commitment, you generally believe they love you, even if you have moments of insecurity. But if you're avoidant, even overwhelming evidence of love doesn't quite convince you. You remain suspicious or detached. You tell yourself it won't last, or that they don't really know you, or that they love an idealized version rather than your true self. These beliefs protect you from fully receiving and depending on the love available to you, maintaining your defended position even within relationship. 9. You don't deactivate when things get good. One of the most characteristic patterns of avoidant attachment is deactivation when relationships are going well. Just when intimacy deepens, when things feel comfortable and close, when the relationship seems to be moving toward greater commitment, the avoidant person suddenly needs distance. This pattern is confusing and painful for partners because it seems to come from nowhere. The relationship is good, which is exactly what triggers the avoidant person's anxiety. Good means intimate, and intimate means vulnerable, and vulnerable means dangerous. So the avoidant person deactivates, creating distance through various means to reduce the intimacy that has been building. If you're not avoidant, you don't experience relationship going well as threat. When you and your partner are connecting deeply, when you're having meaningful conversations, when you're experiencing intimacy and closeness, this feels good and you want more of it. You don't suddenly need distance when things are going well. You're able to enjoy the periods when relationship is flowing smoothly without sabotaging them or creating problems. You can tolerate the happiness and closeness without it triggering anxiety that requires you to create distance. The pattern of deactivation is specific and revealing. If you're avoidant, deactivation often happens after particularly intimate moments or periods. After vulnerable conversation where you opened up more than usual, you might become distant for several days. After particularly close or connected time together, you might suddenly need lots of space. After your partner expresses increased commitment or feeling more deeply in love, you might pull back. The timing of your withdrawal reveals that it's triggered by the intimacy itself rather than by any actual problem in the relationship. Your internal experience during good times in relationship reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, when things are going well, you feel good. You feel happy, connected, grateful. You think about how lucky you are to have found this person. But if you're avoidant, when things are going well, you start feeling uncomfortable. You notice small flaws that suddenly bother you. You start thinking about incompatibilities. You feel trapped or suffocated, even though nothing about the relationship has actually changed, except that it's gotten closer. This discomfort with things going well is classic avoidant pattern. How you respond to your partner's increasing investment also matters. If you're not avoidant, when your partner expresses growing feelings or increasing commitment, you generally feel good about that. You might feel the same, or you might not be quite at the same place yet, but their growing feelings don't trigger withdrawal or panic. But if you're avoidant, your partner's increased investment triggers your anxiety. Their growing attachment to you feels like pressure or trap. Instead of feeling valued and secure, you feel threatened and need to create distance to reduce your own vulnerability. 10. You want the person you're with, not the idea of them. The final sign you're not avoidant is that you're capable of wanting the actual person you're with, rather than just the idea of them or what they represent. Avoidant people often struggle to see their partners clearly. They either idealize during distant periods, projecting onto the person qualities they don't actually have, or they devalue when close, focusing only on flaws and incompatibilities. This fluctuation between idealization and devaluation prevents avoidant people from seeing and wanting the real person in front of them. They want the fantasy version they've constructed, or they're repelled by the real version they're too close to. If you're not avoidant, you can see your partner relatively clearly, recognizing both their positive qualities and their flaws without either idealization or devaluation. You're attracted to and want the real person, not a fantasy version. You can appreciate their positive qualities without needing them to be perfect. You can acknowledge their flaws without those flaws making them unacceptable. You want them as they are, rather than wanting them to change into someone else or wishing they were different in fundamental ways. Your consistency in how you feel about your partner reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, your feelings remain relatively stable. You might feel more or less attracted at different times, but the baseline of caring and wanting to be with them remains consistent. But if you're avoidant, your feelings fluctuate dramatically based on distance. When you're apart, you miss them and think fondly of them. When you're together, especially for extended periods, you feel increasingly negative about them and the relationship. This fluctuation reveals that your feelings are more about managing distance than about the actual person. How you think about your partner when you're apart also matters. If you're not avoidant, you think about your partner with warmth and affection when you're apart. You look forward to seeing them again. You might miss them. But if you're avoidant, you often think more fondly about your partner when you're not with them than when you are. The distance allows you to idealize them and to access feelings that closeness makes uncomfortable. You might miss them when apart, but then when you're together, you feel suffocated or disappointed, rather than happy to be reunited. Your acceptance of your partner's full humanity reveals whether you're avoidant. If you're not avoidant, you can accept that your partner is human with both strengths and weaknesses. You don't need them to be perfect. You can appreciate who they are in their totality. But if you're avoidant, you struggle with your partner's humanity. Their needs, flaws, emotions, all feel like too much. You want them to be low maintenance, undemanding, emotionally self-sufficient. When they're human and therefore sometimes needy or emotional or flawed, you feel disappointed or burdened, rather than accepting that this is normal. If most of these signs describe you, if you can tolerate emotional discomfort, genuinely want repair, don't experience needs as threats, can ask for help, don't keep score of independence, can express feelings naturally, don't romanticize being alone, can receive love without suspicion, don't deactivate when things are good, and want the actual person you're with, then you're likely not avoidant. You might have some avoidant tendencies that emerge in specific contexts, particularly when you're with genuinely unhealthy or smothering partners. But your baseline attachment style is probably secure or anxious rather than avoidant. This recognition is important because it means you should stop accepting the label of avoidant when partners or others try to pathologize your healthy boundaries, your need for some autonomy, or your refusal to tolerate unacceptable behavior. You're not avoidant for leaving relationships that don't meet your needs. You're not avoidant for setting boundaries with partners who are actually too demanding. You're not avoidant for recognizing when someone can't provide the intimacy you need and choosing to move on. Avoidance is a specific pattern of defending against intimacy itself, not the healthy capacity to recognize when intimacy isn't actually available with a specific person and choosing differently.